Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you can join us on this very special day. My name is Norma Levy, and I'm the founder and president of New Plaza Cinema, a nonprofit cinema. And today we're looking forward to a lively discussion about that amazing 1942 film, Casablanca, on its 80th anniversary. And now I'm pleased to introduce the host for this talkback, our wonderful curator, Gary Palmucci. Gary?
Well, thank you, Norma. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're going to hear a lot about Casablanca from multiple perspectives, including perhaps the debunking of a few myths about its casting and a few other matters. The thing that has struck me the most this week about this film is how an American classic, whose signature song is "As Time Goes By," has reverberated in my own life. 50 years ago, as a high school senior, I saw it for the first time, first of several times. And 5 years ago, I took my son to see it for his first time on its 75th anniversary. He subsequently discussed it with his grandmother, who at age 90 still vividly recalled seeing it in its original release, also as a high school senior. And 5 years later, we're celebrating her 95th and the movie's 80th birthday. Now, Max, Warner Brothers has been in a world of trouble, it seems, here for the last few years, but this is one film in which they have spared no expense on preservation and re-release, including the sparkling original trailer, which you're about to show us.
Yes, Gary, there have been numerous Casablanca trailers made over the years. I remember for the 50th anniversary reissue via Turner Classic Movies, there was a wonderful trailer made in 1992. But we are going to take a look at the original from 1942 to get a sense exactly how Warner Brothers was selling this truly iconic motion picture, although it was not yet iconic, to the general public of the wartime years.
Casablanca, city of hope and despair, located in French Morocco in North Africa, the meeting place of adventurers, fugitives, criminals, refugees lured into this danger-swept oasis by the hope of escape to the Americas. But they're all trapped, for there is no escape. Against this fascinating background is woven the story of an imperishable love and the enthralling saga of 6 desperate people, each in Casablanca, to keep an appointment with destiny.
I was willing to shoot Captain Reno, and I'm willing to shoot you. All right, Major, you asked for it.
You knew how much I loved you. How much I still love you.
I know a good deal more about you than you suspect. I know, for instance, that you're in love with a woman. It's perhaps a strange circumstance that we both should love the same woman.
What do you want for Sam?
I don't buy and sell human beings.
That's too bad. That's Casablanca's leading commodity.
You can ask any price you want, but you must give me those letters.
That's no deal.
All right. I tried to reason with you. I tried everything. Now I want those letters.
Of course, despite a few pieces of stock footage, every frame of that was shot on the Warner Brothers lot. That final airport scene generated a line which became famous in a film released in the mid-90s, which actually won a couple of Academy Awards, also very prized by my son's generation as well. And I'll bet most of our viewers can guess the title of it here. Maybe we'll hold off till the end on that.
Well, it's been satirized on so many levels. I'm betraying my youth here, but my first exposure to Casablanca was in the Woody Allen film Play It Again, Sam,
That
which
same
opened,
year, 50 years ago, that
yes,
came out.
December of '72. It opens with the airport scene towards the end, and I hadn't seen Casablanca before. And then a year or two later, I got to see the entire film. But it was not only satirized in that film by Woody Allen and Diane Keaton and Tony Roberts, it was actually paid homage to by Steven Soderbergh in 2006 in his George Clooney, Kate Blanchett film, The Good German, which is a deliberate tribute at the end to Casablanca, right down to the prop plane and the backlighting and all the smoke and mirrors that made that famous scene in the original so
Well,
timeless.
I imagine in Milwaukee, as was the case for me in Boston, there was an independent channel which had a big chunk of the Warner Brothers library and was constantly running the Maltese Falcon, the Treasury of Sierra Madre, Key Largo, They Drive by Night, the Roaring Twenties. That was my introduction to Bogart, and of course, Casablanca was one of those from that storied library, which you also spent some time studying the files of, I believe, right at the University of Wisconsin.
You know, I did not have that pleasure. I know others such as Stephen Smith have actually got into the Casablanca papers. My knowledge of the film has to do with that amazing book that I know we've talked about before, Inside Warner Brothers, which reprints a lot of the memoranda. But the other day when we were talking about the film itself at New Plaza Cinema, I was recalling a 1986 Museum of Modern Art exhibition where they displayed a lot of the Warner Brothers memos. And there were some great Casablanca memos from Hal Wallace and Michael Curtice and others that didn't make it into that Warner Brothers book that I mentioned. And there were some very funny things about Casablanca.
And I think our special guest, Alan Rhodey, we were discussing this the other day. He is intimately familiar with all those memos, those in the book and out of the book, including one that I thought had a little more credence than he advised us it does, that in the early stages of casting, Ronald Reagan and Ann Sheridan were being considered for the leads in the film, which would have been, some kind of nightmarish situation as far as posterity is concerned. But that's just an urban myth of some sort, as we'll hear soon.
Yeah, we're gonna talk more about that with Alan. It certainly was based on a stage play. Everybody Comes to Rick's, and we'll talk more about that. I guess a good place to start would be on the enduring power of Casablanca, the fact that 80 years later, we're still discussing it and that it seems to affect people of all generations. It works on so many different levels, depending on what your interests are. If you're into the romance is there, the love affair that cannot be positively fulfilled to its furthest level because of the marriage situation between the woman. There's the political aspects, refugees seeking visas. There's the humor that's just unstoppable in some of those scenes in the cafe. We can just go on and on. What do you think some of the enduring aspects
Well,
are?
I think the thing that struck me most this week was that, you think back, I assume, and maybe Alan will give us some more details on this shortly, that exactly when the picture started shooting, I'm guessing sometime in maybe the first quarter of 1942. And by no means was it a sure thing at this point that Germany was going to lose the war. This is a few months or weeks after Pearl Harbor, and all the setbacks in the Pacific. Things were going pretty badly for the Allies at this point. So I think there really was must have been a whole different frame of mind among the participants making the film and the many expatriates who are in the movie who fled various countries, Germany, France, etc., to get the hell out of there. I mean, the world was in a pretty grim spot at this point, in ways that I don't think we can really even wrap our heads around in our generation, despite all the mishigas going on, suspending the Constitution and the Ukraine and all the things that go on here at this moment in time.
It's one of the few. Casablanca is one of the very few films of 1942-43. It falls into the propaganda category. Clearly, it was designed to build support for the war effort, but it's one of the very few that holds up from those years. And yes, you have some speechifying. Yes, you have some morale boosting scenes, but there are all these other levels that elevated above everything else that was being ground out by the studios. it transcends propaganda, really. It works on so many different levels, and for reasons that I've kind of alluded to.
Well, when they sing the Marseillaise, I mean, they really mean it. That really gets you, stirs you
Oh,
up every single time that we hear it.
absolutely. And one of those Warner Brothers memos included something from Hal Wallace that gave instructions that even though Victor Laszlo is leading a small group of musicians at the cafe to play the Marseillaise, Wallace wanted a full symphonic orchestra to join in very shortly. So the Warner Brothers Orchestra was brought in for that. And that, of course, adds to the unbelievable power of that sequence.
Well,
And
Hal Walls is a producer who's probably not that well known today outside of real film historians and aficionados. I tend to think of him primarily as the producer of the Elvis films, or at least the early ones at
a sad decline
at Paramount
artistically,
Pictures.
if not commercially.
Yes, and then occasionally some very good films like Beckett with Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton. But he was also very active in the 40s and 50s, and perhaps you could illuminate us on this point. Was Warner Brothers his home studio, or his studio where he originally was producing?
Yes, Hal Wallace, who's credited with being the producer of Casablanca, had started as a production, or he rose to power as a production executive with a man we've discussed many times here, Darryl F. Zanuck.
Yes.
They were co-running production. They each had their own giant divisions. I believe in the late 20s, there was competition there. When Zanuck left Warner's over a political dispute at the studio in 33, then Wallace took over primarily the production activities and production supervision under Warner. And so throughout the 30s and into the 40s, he's going to step back and be just a producer under Warner's around 44. So he's not going to be overseeing the whole slate of pictures. But he is very much responsible for the look and the feel of the Warner Brothers films at that time, and establishing a mood and an atmosphere that is so vital in a film like Casablanca, which has that feel of a classic Warner Brothers film of that period.
And then we have a director, which many of our regular listeners are familiar with, I think, making his third appearance on the program, which may be tops for a director so far. And Michael Curtiz. Previously, we revisited The Breaking Point with John Garfield, and also A Young Man with a Horn with Kirk Douglas. So that this is the hat trick for Mr. Curtiz, I guess, and he's certainly his most famous film.
Gary, don't forget Mildred Pierce.
Oh my goodness, that's right, 4.
That makes 4.
A grand slam for Mr. Curtiz. Excuse me. Thank you, Daniel.
And
how could I forget that? Those who know me would know.
And how ironic, considering he was in one of the Casablanca, I know it was one of the DVDs that came out from Warner's. There was a segment on Michael Curtiz, quote, the great director you've probably never heard of, something to that effect. And when you think of his major contributions, our guest Alan K. Rode has written a biography of Curtiz, and he's going to tell us more about that. Before we bring Alan on, in watching the film today, of course, you can't spot check Casablanca. Once it starts, you have to watch it. We all know, we all have our favorite lines, and there are do you have a particular favorite line from Casablanca?
Well, we could say round up the usual suspects, and that would be the answer to the question. That
exactly. And
the ultimate cynical line in a film, chock-a-block with them.
Oh yes, and some of the best ones going to Claude Rains, but there was one that I totally had forgotten that I was laughing out loud when Bogart makes a wager with Rains, and he's asking for 20,000 francs if he wins. Rains says, "Make it 10. I'm only a poor corrupt official." And that I had completely forgotten that line. The Germans have outlawed miracles, and Claude told his men to be especially destructive to Rick's Cafe when they were searching it. So. We can go on, but I would love at this point to bring in our very, very special guest, Alan K. Rode, who is, through the efforts of Dan Cahill's putting us in touch with him, is agreed to join us today to talk about Casablanca. Alan K. Rode is a biographer and a film scholar. He's the executive producer and host of the Arthur Lyons Film Noir Festival in Palm Springs that celebrated its 22nd year in May of last year. He's the co-programmer and co-host of Noir City Hollywood and Chicago film festivals, and a charter director and treasurer of the Film Noir Foundation, which also has as a member someone by the name of Eddie Muller. Now, he's very, very important in the world of film noir studies. You've heard his name, or you've heard him speak on various DVD commentaries and seen his essays. His latest book, Blood on the Moon, is due out in March from the University of New Mexico Press, which is going to be about classic Western film and analyzes the post-World War II melding of the film noir cinematic style with the American Western. Previously, he published his biography, Michael Curtiz, A Life in Film, which came out in November of 2017 and now is available in audio and paperback editions. He's co-produced several Film Noir Foundation film restorations and Blu-ray releases with Flicker Alley. And needless to say, we couldn't be more thrilled to have Alan K. Rode with us today. We catch him in the midst of responding to an inquiry I had about Casablanca being a film noir, considering it has low lighting, Venetian lights, Venetian blind shadows, women of intrigue, doomed lovers, political intrigue. Alan K. Rode didn't agree with that, and here is his response.
Hal Wallace really learned at Zanuck's elbow, took over and produced a string of great films. And it was really, Wallace and Curtiz were really the yin and yang, as I write in my book, of Warner Brothers. They both rose together. And from a time where Curtiz was erroneously thought of as a studio vocational mechanic, as it were, that he just shot the script and he couldn't speak English well and blah, blah, blah. And in doing the research in my book that took 6 years, I found out it was the complete opposite, that Curtiz would agree to everything that Wallace and Zanuck wanted to do, and then he would go down the set and try to make his own movie and change the script, change wardrobe, do all of this, and really drove Wallace round the bend to the point where during the Charge of the Light Brigade in 1936, Wallace almost fired him. And Curtiz finally compromised and bent his knee in large part because he had seen what happens to people who cross the Warners. And by another part, his American citizenship had not come through yet, even though he had been at Warner Brothers for 10 years, since 1926. So he was able to compromise, and Wallace and Curtiz became great, great close friends. They rode horses together. Curtiz was a great polo player, and so on and so forth. So this collaboration of Casablanca after, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Angels with Dirty Faces, Captain Blood, The Sea Wolf, all of the great films that Wallace and Curtiz collaborated on. Wallace was so involved is that he took Arthur Edison, who was the cinematographer, and in a series of memos was just basically berating him. It's not dark enough. I want more smoke. I want more of this. I want that film noir look. But no one in 1942 knew what the hell film noir was in Hollywood. I mean, they didn't even know into the 1950s. But at its heart, Casablanca is as you had said, a wartime boosting propaganda film. And it was also a romantic film, a very romantic film. And I think there's a tendency now to use the word noir to sell black and white movies that aren't a Western or an Abbott and Costello movie made during the 1940s and 50s and say that it's film noir. But I really don't think that's the case.
Well stated. So this was based on a stage play that was unproduced, and Noah Eisenberg wrote a memorable, effective book about Casablanca called We'll Always Have Casablanca 5 years ago. And he indicated that in many ways, the film followed the play pretty closely in many instances. Are you in agreement there?
Yes, I am. There's no question about that. I've read the play by Murray Barnett and Joan Allison. And Burnett's inspiration came during a trip to Europe in 1938 and going to cafes, and also the virulent anti-Semitism that he saw that Burnett saw in Vienna also colored a lot of the political, social commentary, if you will, in Casablanca. And what's interesting is 30 years after the film was released, Burnett actually sued one of the screenwriters, Howard Koch. And essentially, the three writers, there were a number of writers, because these writers, the way Warner Brothers and the studios worked is you had a producer that used this writer for this version, or to punch up this script, or to polish this, but it was never a collaboration. These people never sat in a room together and worked together. Wallace was controlling it. It was analogous to like a bicycle wheel, and Wallace was the guy putting the spokes in with the different writers. So it was basically the Epstein twins, the Epstein brothers, and generally speaking, they did a lot of the humor. You know, I'm shocked to know gambling was going on here, and all of that. The Germans wore gray, you wore blue. One of my favorite lines from the film. You know, what a nice thing to say to Ingrid Bergman. But they did a lot of the humor and the light stuff. And then Howard Koch was brought in to write another script that got merged. And Howard Koch was a real political lefty. I don't think he was a member of the CPUSA. I don't think he was a Communist Party member, but he was very, very much left. And being left and being anti-fascist in 1942 was a pretty popular sentiment. And so Koch put a lot of the stuff into Casablanca about, you know, who was Rick. And he was running guns to Ethiopia, and he has that exchange with Claude Rains where Claude Rains points it out, like saying, "You're really a closet liberal, a rank sentimentalist." And he said, "Well, I got well paid for it." And then Rains says, "Well, the other side would have paid you better. The Republican side in France would have paid you more money." And Bogart kind of shrugs. So Koch put all the kind of, for lack of a better term, speechifying and patriotism and anti-fascism in it. And then Wallace brought in Casey Robinson at the end, and there's a series of memos, and I went through every memo, I turned every page in the Warner archive on Casablanca and just about all of Curtiz's films. And what Curtiz and Casey Robinson said is, the melodrama is good, the characterizations are good, everything is good, but the love story is deficient. Why is Bogart, you know, down in the dumps, sitting there drinking after Bergman comes up? You have to have more about the love story. And from that, he and Curtiz devised this whole flashback sequence where he's in Paris opening the champagne bottle with Bergman, and they're in love, and then the Germans come in, and you know, that's a so-and-so howitzer. It means they're 5 miles away, and that whole flashback thing. But it was really Howard Koch and the Epstein twins, and all three of them won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay, rightfully so, I might add.
Noah Eisenberg gave a great example of what you're talking about these different writers contributing different things. For example, from what I understand it was Howard Koch who wrote the line, "I don't buy and sell human beings." And the Epstein twins wrote the response. "That's too bad. It's Casablanca's most enterprising commodity," or something like that.
I don't know where Noah sourced that from, but I would tend to agree with that, because that's a perfect separation of the styles of the two writers. And you know, the Epstein brothers were one of the few people that poked fun at Warner Brothers and the movie industry generally. And in 1946, there was a strike riot between the IATSE and the Conference of Studio Unions outside the Warner Gate. And they had sluggers there beating up the CSU people and the Burbank police, and cars were overturned. And my late friend Marcia Hunt actually went down there and watched that because she wanted to find out what was going on. And Jack Warner and his retinue watched all this mayhem from the soundstage roof like spectators. And after that, Julie Epstein suggested that the motto at the time of Warner Brothers that Harry Warner came up with was combining good picture making with good citizenship. and Julie Epstein said they should change that to combining good picture making with good marksmanship.
Wow.
So he was not afraid to poke fun at the Warners and at the industry generally. And of course, in the late 40s, when Jack Warner testified in front of UAC in closed session, he threw all his writers, including the Epsteins and Howard Koch, under the bus by accusing them of being communists and being disloyal.
Absolutely, and the dialogue is astonishing in Casablanca. The writing is astonishing, but the visual look is also astonishing. And at this point, and we're going to continue talking, of course, but at this point, let's bring Dan Cahill in, our cinematography expert, who can share with us, once again, not an enviable task considering all the memorable angles and camera, the images from Casablanca. Dan, what do you have to tell us about Casablanca?
Oh boy, what do you want to hear? I got a
Whatever you
lot.
got.
First of all, we are here in Casablanca, which is now the largest city in Morocco, located on the upper left corner of Africa. Before we go any further, I just want to settle a point and bring the truth out at last. Much as I hate to contradict Captain Reynaud, Casablanca is not in the desert. It's hundreds of miles away from anything looking like a desert. It's a major port on the Atlantic Ocean. So, alas, another misleading bit of misinformation from Hollywood.
So in fact, there are waters in Casablanca. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Sort of.
but sort of. Well, yeah, but they're not in the desert. That's the main point. This is an interesting shot early in the film. I love the fact that they're able to combine the two major plot threads, flying free and going to Rick's, in one frame. It's kind of neat. One thing that cinematographers pride themselves on, especially now that a lot of filmmaking has moved out of the studio into the real world, is trying to motivate your light sources, to be able to justify them and say, oh, well, that's the sun coming in through the window, or somebody left the kitchen door open, or that's the candle on the left. Here we have an early shot which reminds us that there is always a searchlight going back and forth in front of Rick's. And right now, Bogey is caught in the beam of the searchlight. Shadows play a very important part, and all of the shadows in this film look like they're well motivated. The shadows behind Bogart here are really authentically cast by the beautiful designs of native Moroccan lamps. They are quite extraordinary. Similarly, the palm fronds, which are shadowing Victor Laszlo and Ilse Lund here, you can see an actual palm in the background on the left, although I'm sure these shadows were cast by a Cucaloris or something designed to cast shadows in the studio system. Here we have Humphrey Bogart immersed in shadow. This man at this moment is living in shadows and probably glad that his drinking habit is cast in the shadows as well. Another beautiful shadow shot that brings back all sorts of memories to those of us who've seen this film repeated times. More shadows in the background behind Bogey. I'm not sure what they represent, window panes perhaps, but it adds an extra layer of texture to the film. Here we have one of these shots of the entrance of a female lead. Reminds me of the shot in Out of the Past, the famous shot where Jane Greer walks in from the daylight into the bar where Richard Mitchum is sitting. All water needs to be lit from the side, especially if it's in falling drops. And here is one example, casting a shadow on Ingrid Bergman's tear. Makes it all the more emotional for us. We have a shot here at the Blue Parrot. And I just noticed this, over Bogart's shoulder on the left is the shadow of a dancing woman, presumably a belly dancer, although they're native to Egypt, not Morocco, but who knew that? And the actual woman is obscured by the two people behind Bogart, but she's there. You can see here in an earlier frame from this same shot. This is nothing if not a classic noir look. Overlooking the street with a shadowed person, a shadower, lit by one light source. It's very typically noir, and this may have been one of the things that Hal Wallace wanted in the film. Venetian blinds, you can't do a noir look without Venetian blinds. And the next shot here, we have a riot of Venetian blinds. I think they gave up on motivating where the sources of light were coming from. They just said, more blinds, more blinds. And this is a shot from the famous scene where Bergman comes wanting the letters of transit from Bogey. And when she draws the pistol on him, it ends that scene. And I want to end my slideshow right there, but I have a few other thoughts to offer. That scene that we just looked at, about 25 years ago, I had a job working at the NYU Law School, and I provided video production and general support to the education of future lawyers. And some of the faculty wanted me to show that scene, which I was happy to do, as a demonstration of negotiation skills. This indeed is part of the legacy of Casablanca. And I'm sure they had some way of describing the moment when she pulls out the gun and escalates everything. Other things that I've got a couple more instances that I wanted to refer to. One is a wonderful article in the November 7th New Yorker about a month ago. And it's about the Iranian director Asghar Farhadi, who has been getting in a bit of trouble lately. Now, if you don't know this man, you should look up his films. One of them won an Oscar for Best Foreign Film. That would be A Separation. He also
He's won 2 Oscars actually for Best Foreign Film.
I'm not surprised.
The Salesman, I think, was the other one.
And recently, his most recent film, A Hero, has gotten him into some trouble.
Brilliant film, brilliant film.
Yes, they're all brilliant.
Yeah.
But the question is, how does he manage to make these films in a culture like Iran? So I have some answers come in this article, which is fascinating, and you should look for it. A student in a group, a female student, has accused him of plagiarizing her story idea for A Hero. Okay, this has escalated to the point where it's become sort of a public scandal, especially within the film business there. And I'm going to read you a paragraph or two here from the New Yorker piece. The head of the House of Cinema in Iran, which is a film guild supported by the government, went to the student and told her that people could use her accusation as an opportunity to impugn the prestige of Iranian cinema. He reminded her of one of the last scenes of Casablanca, when the hero, Rick, conceals the truth by telling the husband of a woman he still loves that their romance is over, before helping them escape the Nazis. The student, who knew the scene well, said, "He doesn't lie, but he doesn't tell the truth." This is what we've learned from cinema, the head of the Cinema Guild said. He advised her to think carefully about the moral implications of telling the truth. Was it right to tell someone in a loud voice that she had too many freckles on her face, or to tell a person that her nail polish was poorly done? He said, quote, "The difference between telling the truth and shamelessness is a very thin hair," unquote. Well, this is yet another lesson that people have retained from our favorite film here. And my last reference comes from the august organization, the American Society of Cinematographers, which is essentially an honorary organization that a cinematographer has to be invited to join. And they have recently celebrated their 100th anniversary and published a coffee table book called Our First 100 Years. So what possible image could they find to put on the cover of this book? This may look familiar to some of you. And that is, I am presuming, Arthur Edison, the DP, standing at the camera there.
Yes, it is.
So there we have it. That's my little essay on the look of Casablanca, but the lingering look of Casablanca. And I'd like to sneak in one more little thought here. Gary and Max have shared their first experiences with the film. Mine, I can beat you. Mine was in the summer of 1968. As many of you know, I was in the Peace Corps in Morocco. And during our training in Denver that summer, the staff thought, well, what the heck? It's not accurate, but let's rent a 16mm film of Casablanca and project it for the kids. And we loved it so much. Most of us had not seen it before. We loved it so much, we wouldn't let them return it to the rental house. They had to keep it for an extra couple of days and show it 2 more times. So lasting influence.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Alan, any thoughts from you on the enduring power of Casablanca? Because yes, it's of a time and place, yet 80 years later, it still touches audiences.
I think Casablanca, the late Andrew Sarris described it in his book about directors that he gives short shrift to Michael Curtiz as a happy accident. And I prefer to think that Casablanca was something that happened accidentally on purpose. And by that, I mean, this was a confluence of timing having to do with the war. And Jack Warner was very clever. The initial premiere was right around the Casablanca conference. He timed it for that. And then in '43, the general release was when the American Army went into North Africa. So he was very savvy in that way. So timing had a lot to do with it. And I think it was really the studio system at its best. You had a great producer in Hal Wallace working at peak pitch at Warner Brothers at that time. I think he was supervising 4 or 5 other films at that time. You had a great director in terms of Michael Curtiz, great writing, great cast, and it was the stable, if you will, of Warner Brothers writers that contributed to all of this. So I think it was kind of all the stars aligning at the right time to make this picture. It was a combination of timing, ingredients, and skill. In fact, Wallace even said that when it was in pre-release and people looked at it, he got a phone call from the Hollywood's chief censor, Joseph Ignatius Breen, who was the kind of like the Pope of Hollywood, enforcing the production code. And out of the clear blue sky, Breen called him and raved about Casablanca and said, you know, this may be the best picture I've looked at. And Breen looked at every picture and he knew nothing about what should be in movies, save what shouldn't be in them. And so it really started this thing. And I think I remember my old friend, the late producer Stanley Rubin, was talking about meeting his wife or doing something, and he said, well, you know, as far as a woman's quality, does she tear up at the end of Casablanca? You know, that was kind of a litmus test, and it really is. So I think the timing, Casablanca really defined in a world that was really clearly divided between right and wrong, what it meant to be on the right side. And I think that has endured through the years, where people can feel that, and they also feel the romance. I mean, if you've ever fallen in love and had your heart broken, which I'm sure all of us have from time to time, you can identify with the whole Bogart-Bergman contremps. And what's interesting is the ending of the movie. Bergman wrote, I think in her book, that no one knew whether she was going to go away with Paul Henreid or stay with Bogart and so forth. And I think that's, I don't agree with that. Everyone knew, first off, from a production code, cultural, contemporary culture point of view, she was not going to abandon her noble husband to stay with her lover bartender in Casablanca. That was never going to happen. What they had to figure out was, how can we make it clean so it feels good? And that's, at that point, Koch was rewriting, and came up with the whole thing about a higher goal than their love and romance. And where Bogart makes that speech, you know, I've got things to do you can't be a part of. You're the guy that keeps Victor Laszlo going. You're his life. And it put the whole movie, that ending put the whole movie on a higher plane, in my opinion. Interestingly, there was a real argument in the morning that scene was shot between Bogart and Curtiz that got so contentious that the production files indicated the production assistant who worked for a guy named Tenny Wright, who was the production manager, said that Wallace had to leave his office and come down to the set to arbitrate between Bogart and Curtiz. And Wallace rarely did that when he was at Warner Brothers. And there's a lot of speculation. I talked to Curtiz's last significant other, and she told me, he said it was over how the ending was supposed to be shaped. Also, Bogart had a habit by that time of coming in the morning and not knowing his lines. And this happened on Dead Reckoning. It happened Deadline USA. It happened, and he might have just been provoking an argument, so he had time to go over his lines and learn his lines. I mean, that's speculatory, but that did happen to him in other instances. But whatever it was, it got ironed out, and I think the ending of Casablanca elevated it in the film to a rarefied atmosphere that there's certain films like Citizen Kane, Casablanca, and others that transcend cinema and us talking about movies, that becomes a permanent part of the culture. And I think Casablanca is certainly one of those films, because here we are 80 years out, we're still talking about it. Warner's just put another 4K 80th anniversary thing, and I mean, it's kind of like those tentpole movies like The Wizard of Oz, Casablanca. Every anniversary there'll be a new and better version of something, and they recycled the 75-year or 70th year anniversary where I was a talking head in a Michael Curtiz featurette and so forth. So I'm certainly grateful for that. But I think Casablanca endures because people identify with the emotions and the feeling of doing the right thing, even when it hurts, falling in love, losing that love, and someone who is dedicated to something more than himself. And I think that those emotions resonate with all of us.
I would just add a sequel to that, or a coda to that the film has an extremely broad appeal. If you are a dewy-eyed romantic, or if you are a hard-bitten citizen of the world cynic, you will still love this movie. And I consider myself a bit of both of those.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a hard time watching the movie without getting verklempt at certain moments. It's just always there.
Yeah.
So,
interesting, Daniel, about the cinematography. Wallace wanted James Wong Howe to shoot this movie.
Sure, why not?
And this was Jack Warner's, part of Jack Warner's divide and conquer method of running the studio, where even Wallace, who got this big independent production contract where he could say it's a Hal Wallace production, and he supposedly would get access to the best scripts and the best talent, which that contract led to the falling out between he and Jack Warner that was crystallized when Casablanca won Best Picture, and Hal Wallace got up to accept the award and was sitting with the Warners, and the Warners stretched their legs out at the Chinese Theater, blocked him from going up there so Jack Warner could run up and take the Oscar from Jack Benny, who was the host. True story. And that was the camel's straw. And after that evening, everyone knew that Hal Wallace would be leaving Warner Brothers shortly after that episode. So Wallace, with all of his power, could not get James Wong Howe, because he was assigned to the hard way. And the studio manager talked to Warner. Warner said, "Screw him, don't move him. He'll have to use Arthur Edison, who was a great cinematographer, who shot Frankenstein and the Maltese Falcon, started way back in Eclair, but poor Arthur Edison had both Wallace and Curtiz riding him constantly. The first shot where you see the choreography of Bustle and Rick's Cafe with that long dolly shot of all the refugees sitting at the tables and so forth. That first day, Curtiz chewed him out because he took 90 minutes to light the entire set. And the thing at Warner's, I think creatively, Jack Warner's guidance to directors and producers during his tenure as the studio head could be summed up in two words, and those are hurry up.
Or get it done.
And
That's
get
an
it
extra
done,
word.
hurry up. He would send Curtiz a memo before each picture saying, I know you're going to go like hell, and this is going to be your best picture, and this and that, and you're going to come in, under budget and all this other stuff. And he just, Jack just piled on the pressure. He just piled on the pressure all the time. Hurry up, get done. And during the war, you had the government keeping track of how much film stock was used. You couldn't use so much wood for sets and nails, all of this. And they had the government looking over his shoulder. And there's memos saying to Curtiz saying, you shot X amount of angles of these guys sitting at a table. Don't you want to win the war? And then Curtiz would send a memo back. Yes, unfortunately, Walter Houston, this was on Mission to Moscow, which is a whole nother
Ironically.
discussion. He said, unfortunately, Walter Houston went up on his lines 15 times, and there's no one who wants to win the war more than me, Jack. Thank you very much. So that was the Warner Brothers was a sharp-elbowed, tough, working class studio. I mean, when you think of the stars like Edward G. Robinson and James Cagney and Ann Sheridan and those, you would never see those people at MGM. MGM, you would see a film lit like FAO Schwartz's Window on Christmas Day with all these lights and everything like that. And it was just a completely different kind of studio, a great studio, I might add.
That's fabulous. Let's talk a little more about the actors. And then there's another theme aspect of the movie I'd like to talk about as well. But the actors. All right. So Bogart is finally getting above, top billing. Warner is finally acknowledging him as a star after leading him along for so long. Ingrid Bergman's on loan from Selznick. The other actors. Someone asked me the other day, you have so many European emigres, many who had to flee Nazism cast. That could not have been a coincidence. I imagine people like Dalio and S.Z. Sakal and others. Could you share and this could be anyone.
Well, here's a couple vignettes on that. First off, Curtiz cast all of those actors. I mean, he didn't cast Bergman. He didn't cast Henry. Henry actually turned it down. And Curtiz wanted Philip Dorn, who was tied up over at MGM with something. And there's memos between he and Wallace saying, and Wallace actually saying that I don't think we can get anybody with an accent to play Victor Laszlo and so forth, and suggested a couple people that I think would have been awful. And he said, I think Henry will turn it down. And initially Henry did turn it down. Because he said, hey, I don't get the girl. I'm not above the title. So Wallace bought out his contract with RKO and put his name above the title and sweetened the deal. So he went ahead and did the picture. But the other actors, Curtiz was singularly responsible for getting S.Z. Sakal in the movie, and craved his humor. And of course, Zakal's real name was Jacob Gero, and he was a Hungarian music hall comedian back in the day when Curtiz was making films during World War I in Hungary. So they were old pals, and he wanted to get him in, but Zakal wanted more money than Wallace was willing to pay. And of course, Curtiz ended up forging a compromise and got Zakal in. But all of the other people were mostly refugees, and the guy that played the big doorman standing outside the gambling arena was an actor named Dan Seymour, who late in life ended up being the executor of Fritz Lang's estate and was in a lot of Fritz's films.
Yeah.
And he was on set when the La Marseillaise scene, and he said, I looked around and these people were actually crying. And I realized these people were refugees. Most of them were Jewish. In fact, Mr. Leuchtag, remember Mr. Leuchtag at the table, what watch? This watch, 10 watch or something. He's asking what time it is, and they're trying to do that. Well, he's a distant relative to me by marriage. And he later on, he was doing those little old Italian Swiss colony wine commercials in the 60s, dressed in Lederhosen, that little
Oh my God.
But Yeah, he was related to my great aunt Emmy, and most all of these people were Jewish. They were refugees from Europe, refugees from Hitler, and Curtiz cast all of them in the film. So that is very, very true. Claude Rains was perfect. Although the Epsteins kind of thought, well, how are you going to have an English guy play a French guy and a French policeman in North Africa? But that didn't. And they wrote their best. I mean, Rains has the best pithy dialogue in the entire movie.
Every line out of him is a zinger. I mean, there's without exception.
Particularly at the end where he's telling Bogart's telling Ingrid Bergman, 10-1, we'd all end up in a concentration camp. Wouldn't we, Louis? And he goes, I'm afraid Major Strasser would insist. I mean, it's just so good. And of course, Conrad Veidt, here's a guy who was virulently anti-Nazi, got out of Germany, came to Hollywood so he could play Nazis. I mean,
and he died not long after the film was in release.
Yeah, that's correct. I think he died on a golf course of a heart attack. But he was great. Everybody in there, the casting, Curtiz giving Sidney Greenstreet the fly swatter in the Blue Parrot Cafe, going like this. Hal Wallace put the parrot outside. He said, put a parrot outside the Blue Parrot Cafe. The other thing about Casablanca, it was being written as the film was being shot, which was very out of character with Wallace, because Wallace liked to have a complete script for obvious reasons, including budgetary reasons, when the film started, and it didn't work out that way. So Casablanca, at its core, was a film that everyone involved in it, to the last possible minute, tried to make better, even to the point of the ending where Rains and Bogart walk off in stage one. And by the way, that whole last sequence was not shot at an airport. It was shot at stage one with a mock-up small model plane and short people, midgets, as the attendants way off in the distance in the plane.
So that is a true story. I had read that somewhere.
Story, yes. So... that line, Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. That Wallace came up with that, and Bogart, the picture had already wrapped. Bogart was on his yacht, and they called Bogart back in to dub the line. And that was Hal Wallace's line on how to end the movie.
Now, Alan, the New York film critics who voted their awards this week in 1942 voted Casablanca Best Picture of the Year. But the Oscars, it apparently was not Oscar eligible that year. It was not until 1943, the following year, that the film won the Oscar. Was this because of the troop movements and
I think it was because in 42 it had like a one premiere night in Hollywood or New York. I'd have to look at my book. I can't remember, but it didn't have enough of a run, I think, in 42 to qualify. So it went into general release in 43, and then it won the Oscars in March of 1944.
Right.
You got the Oscar. In fact, my book on Curtiz, I open it with the March 2, 1944 Oscar ceremony, which was very different because up until that time, the Oscars had pretty much been an insular dinner type of format at the Biltmore and so on and so forth. In fact, people like Cary Grant kind of decried the Oscars and the Academy Awards turning into a big show for everybody. They used to have, like, all their colleagues would have dinner together and they'd give each other awards and hang out, and the public wasn't invited. But then it became a big deal, and they held it at Grauman's Chinese in 44. It was put on a radio broadcast, on the Armed Services radio broadcast. Jack Benny was the host, and he said, I'm here because Bob Hope had a cold, and he was the MC and so forth. And they let in all these servicemen to fill Grauman's Chinese Theater. And then you had Zanuck in uniform, Ronald Reagan in uniform. And the opening speech by Walter Wanger was that, the motion picture industry puts service to our country above all else. It was even the Academy Awards went on a wartime footing.
So it was not a sign of a lack of confidence in the picture by Warner Brothers. It was just
no, not at all, not at all. And in fact, Hal Wallace, when he did a AFI seminar near the end of his career in, I believe, 1975, said, when asked about Casablanca, he said, "We just started out to make a good picture. We never dreamed it would become a classic." And I think that's a very honest answer. He also took umbrage at some young filmmaker that asked him, "Well, what about you didn't have that many great directors or so on?" And he got highly irate, and he said, "Michael Curtiz is as great a director as anybody who ever worked in Hollywood," and basically politely kind of dressed this young man down for impugning that Michael Curtiz was not a great director. Which was that was that loyalty, because the two of them rose together, stayed friends, and near the end of Curtiz's life, he had Curtiz come back and direct Elvis Presley in King Creole, which is
A very good film.
Yeah.
Elvis said it was his best film, and he said, "I finally have a director who knows how to direct me." And I showed that film at my film festival with the actress who played Elvis's sister, who's in her 90s and still with us, and very, very interesting. And it's a terrific film, because Elvis actually plays a character that's not Elvis, even though he sings and all of that. That was woven into the story, and I think it's Elvis's best picture. So Curtiz, certainly, he directed whole and in part 181 movies. So I mean, that is mind-boggling, and of course, not all of those movies are great. A lot of his movies in Hungary have been lost, and so forth. But many of them are, and he could even take a bad script and make something out of it, and make it move. One of the many Curtizism attributed to him is, somebody pointed out, "Well, Mike, the script doesn't say that this person does this and you're having them do this." And he goes, don't worry. I make it move so fast they'll never know."
On that note, I know we're going to have a lot of questions and thoughts from our audience. Before we open it up to Q&A, just a reminder that the next New Plaza Cinema lecture, which is going to be a week from this coming Wednesday, is going to be on London in film, which I'll be doing. And then our next talk back in 2 weeks will be on Love Actually, as we approach, or as the holidays intensify, shall I say. And I thought, before we get to the Q&A, I'm going to share with you a version of one of the original Love Actually trailers, just to give us a taste of what's coming up.
Hello. It's lovely to see you all.
Lovely.
Yes. Hi, hello, darling. No, I'm not busy. No, far away.
Let's do it. Let's go get the shit kicked out of us by love.
Yes. Oh. God, who do you have to screw around here to get a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit? Right.
Bonjour, Aurelian.
Bonjour. Excuse me for 1 second. Okay, that's done.
You should come sleep at our place. But there's one problem. You'd be naked.
No, I think it'd be fine.
Best shag you ever had?
Britney Spears. No, only kidding. She was rubbish.
There's nothing you can do that can't be done. There's nothing you can sing that can't be sung.
Oh, God, it's half the book.
There's nothing you can say, but you can learn how to play the game. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. Yeah.
She's the one.
All you need is love.
I heard you were gorgeous.
Love is all you need. 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 Love is all you need.
You have this kind of problem?
And that will be the next New Plaza Talk back in 2 weeks. And now Lori or whomever we can assist us with
Hey, everyone. For those of you that want to ask a question, we ask that you raise your hand using the reaction button. There were a couple of people sharing. They were wondering, someone was wondering what the origin, everyone always says, play it again, Sam, which is not a quote in the film. But if anyone knows where the origin of that line, like how did that myth get started?
It was the Woody Allen play, Play It Again, Sam, which ran for a year, which of course his character is inspired by Casablanca. So that was the name of the Woody Allen play in 1969. And then it unfortunately became a myth where when people thought they were quoting Casablanca, they'd always say, play it again, Sam, which of course is not the line.
If anyone has a question, please use the reaction button to raise your hand.
Because I have a question if nobody else does right now.
Go for it, Max.
Well, in the Marseillaise scene, I always get broken up when they cut to Yvonne, the French woman. You see her in close-up, tearfully singing the song. The actress Madeleine Lebeau. Can anyone tell us anything about her?
Yes, she was actually at the time married to Marcello Dallio, who played the croupier. They were husband and wife, and they had to get out of France ahead of the Nazis and had to leave her mother in a cellar. So that was those tears, I think, were I don't think they didn't have Visine in those days or onions, but those tears were genuine. I mean, these people were immigrants, and everyone had a story of having to abandon their life and start all over in a strange country, America, because of that. And she had to leave her mother there in France.
Devastating. Absolutely.
She was also the last principal survivor. I think she died about 4 years ago in her 90s in Spain. And she was the last, I believe, principal cast member that was still alive from Casablanca.
Marcel Dallio from The Rules of the Game, the great Jean Renoir film.
Yes, exactly.
Getting a re-release here shortly.
Exactly.
I have another question until we get another from the audience. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, and then we have a question.
So the Humphrey Bogart character, I mean, my goodness, in watching this movie again, I mean, talk about an anti-hero. This guy, he's not a very admirable man. I mean, he's loyal to no one for most of the film, at least as far as we know. So that was kind of unusual for a film of this type, a commercial film of this type, where they deliberately did not make him likable until we really got a sense of, at the end, of course, he's going to come through. Any theories about this, the anti-hero, and was this an unusual? Did this set a precedent, shall I say, in Hollywood melodrama?
Maybe. I mean, I can't really refute what you're saying, except that it was the character's design all along was where he, the thing about running guns to Ethiopia and fighting for the loyalist side in Spain, and I don't sell human beings and all of that. You get little bites of his true character beneath the cynicism, and then it's revealed that a lot of the cynicism comes from being dumped and left on that train platform in the rain, as he put it, with your guts kicked out. So his cynicism was honest because he had his heart broken. And then, of course, he does the right thing at the end. So I think in a traditional sense, from a Hollywood perspective, Casablanca does have a happy ending, as noble as it is, and the fact that the two lovers have to go apart, but they know that it's for a greater thing than their love, that it's for a greater cause.
It's funny because I show this to my class when we discuss World War II, and I always ask them who they think she really loved, and I get every answer, and I'm like, well, she was told to play it down the middle, so there and who's to say we only have to love one person, right?
That's very true.
In America, we're only allowed to love one person. Just so you know.
Oh,
Europe is different.
One
Thank
at a
you, Matt.
time here in America, one at a
As
time.
as Ingrid Bergman proved.
Someone asked, was the U.S. government involved in the film? It can't be considered propaganda if official request wasn't involved.
I don't know. That question really doesn't make sense. Propaganda can be generated by anybody, and certainly Hollywood did their fair share because they were supporting the war effort, as most of Americans were. But was the government involved in the production or the script or what was done? No, they were not. They were not. Now, Mission to Moscow, which is probably the most nakedly pro-Soviet, pro-Stalin film ever to come out of Hollywood, the government was involved in that one, but not in Casablanca.
Ellen Pilskin, if you could unmute and start your video.
It?
Ellen?
Yeah, okay.
Do you have
I did start the.
Oh, we can hear you. You can go
Okay,
ahead and
that's
ask
fine.
your question.
Okay, Alan, as I said, that I thought that your book on Curtiz was a masterpiece.
Well,
And
thank you. I appreciate that.
because it was a historical tone as well as just a biography of him. But I'm curious about this new book that you're working on having to do with Westerns, because I've become enamored of the 1950s, Westerns, I'm watching every one that I can. So what's your new book then?
My new book is about the 1948 Western Blood on the Moon. And it's for the University of New Mexico Press. They've started a series called Real West, REEL. And it's a short book. I mean, if Michael Curtiz at 700 pages was a symphony, this is more of a concerto as at 150 pages. But what I go into is how the film noir style and Robert Wise's rise as a director at RKO, the rising stardom of Robert Mitchum, the cinematographer, all that, how the film noir style in post-World War II bled into Westerns and helped, if not create, inspire how Westerns in the 1950s, directed by Tony Mann, Bud Boetticher and others, became much more starker, harder, much more noir stained, for lack of a better
I know this film. I've seen it maybe sometime last month, and it is a very, very dark film.
It is. It is. I mean,
Right.
instead of Mitchum in a trench coat and a fedora walking down downtown LA alley in the rain, he's on a trail in Arizona on the back of a horse in the pouring rain.
Right.
But it's very simple. There's a lot of parallels and similar, and the book will be out in March of next year. It's already done.
Okay.
I'm working on something now about Elizabeth Scott and Hal Wallace that I'll be working on next year.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to break in, but I'm watching this on a new computer, and it's probably going to take me another 6 months or so to learn how to really do anything on it. So I can't figure out how I could politely raise my hand or indicate that I have a question.
Okay, if you had a question, go ahead.
Sure.
So this was not my original question, but you really piqued my curiosity when you said that Humphrey Bogart didn't learn his lines. Was there a reason for that? I mean, was he going home and getting shit-faced drunk every night?
Well, until he met Lauren Bacall, the answer to that is kind of yes, because he was in a very tempestuous, for lack of a better term, marriage to an actress named Mayo Matho, who became an alcoholic, and they used to fight a lot. They were called the Battling Bogarts. In one episode, she actually stabbed him in the back. There was a lot of, and Bogart drank. I mean, he didn't keep it a secret. He drank a lot. And the other thing is, as he settled down after he married Bacall in the late 40s, he wanted to spend more time on the Santana, his yacht, more time at home. So I know during the production of Dead Reckoning, for example, he would show up, and in the morning he would start learning his lines, and people would have to wait on him because he was the star. Now,
Yeah.
whether that happened in 1942, and Bogart was, don't get me wrong, Bogart was a consummate professional, but he had been at Warner Brothers making movies since 1935, and mostly in the last reel, he'd get gut shot, grab his stomach, and groan and collapse on a soundstage. So once he became a legitimate star, and Casablanca really made him a romantic star.
Uh-huh.
And that's why Wallace developed the picture for him, because after High Sierra and the Maltese Falcon, and I think he made All Through the Night right around that time too, he was a star, but he wasn't a romantic leading man, and that's what Casablanca did. But Bogart did get to a point in his career where he was completely professional and so forth, and always was, but he didn't want to work a lot of times any harder than he had to.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, Michael Curtiz said, you know, Humphrey Bogart never rehearsed, but always great.
My original question was kind of an observation that in the film, Ingrid Bergman's face, it was hard to keep your eyes off of her. She was, shot in that very soft light. And she's just was a very beautiful woman. But in Casablanca, I found myself looking at Humphrey Bogart's face a lot. He's not the most handsome man. He's not beautiful, but what really interested me was that his face, he was very stoic. His character was very stoic. And somehow through the stoicism, he still conveyed with his face how much he loved the Ingrid Bergman character, and a lot of feelings that are not part of being stoic.
Well, I don't know if there's a question there, but I agree.
Well, I guess I wanted to know if anybody else,
I certainly agree with you. And as I think Robert Ryan once said, good film work, good film acting is mostly done with the eyes. And that's very true. And I think Bogart's expressions in Casablanca mirror his character, the cynicism, the hurt, and then the core of doing the right thing. And I think his reactions to that, even when he's looked at and the leader of the band looks at him like, should we play La Marseillaise, and listen to him, and he goes like that, and then they do it, still in charge. Yeah, I would agree with you. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry.
No, thank you for joining us.
We had Marjorie Gard, who has her hand up. Marjorie, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah. Hi, thank you. For some reason, my hand kept on disappearing, so I kept on. But
I saw you.
In observation of what Max said about his character being cynical and all, I always saw his true side of it from the beginning, just like Captain Renault says to him, deep down, I suspect you're a rank sentimentalist.
Yep.
Right at the beginning, he doesn't let that gambler into the gambling room. For some reason, he just looks at him and he just shakes his head. And he says, do you know who I am? And Bogart says, I do. You're lucky the bar's open to you. And when he lets Joy Page's husband win at the roulette wheel, and and as stated before, he nods to play the anthem. I see his nationalism and his true character through the whole film. And as noted by Paul Henry, he says, you're trying to convince yourself of something you don't believe in. And
Yep.
I do. I think that's very evident through the whole film. So that's my observation.
The cynical facade is starting to dissolve. Absolutely. In those
I think and right. I don't buy and sell human beings. You see his real humanity and his sympathy in his actions and his feelings, not necessarily in his words.
Very well put.
Very, very well put.
The audience knows who he really is.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
Yep.
Ellen Pleskin, you had your hand up a little bit ago. Did you have a question? Ellen?
I think she came on.
Right, I
Ellen was the
did.
one who
Okay.
I did, I
commented
came
on
up.
Alan's
My
book and
bad.
so forth.
Okay, never mind. Okay.
Well, what can I say? This has been an absolutely amazing talk back, and Daniel, thank you for introducing us to Alan and Alan K. Rhodey.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us. We could
Oh, it
go
was a
on for
pleasure.
hours.
I enjoyed it. The thing about Casablanca is there's always more to be said.
Yes.
There is.
And it was a delight meeting all of you and taking the questions, and thanks for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
We will be doing this again, Alan. We're going to hold you to it. And Gary, anything you'd like to add before we turn things over to Sean?
No, I think we pretty much we've said it. We've said a good bit. We can let our audience take it home.
Terrific. Thank you all, gentlemen, and Sean, and also Laurie and Sean, take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys. It was great. As always, it's so great. Sorry that we had a little bit of a problem with the recording, not quite sure what happened there. But I just want to remind everyone, Max already mentioned that on the 14th of December, I believe is the Wednesday, that he's going to be giving the lecture on film in London. And then paired with that is on the Sunday, following Sunday, the 18th, we're going to be doing our holiday program and focusing on discussion on the film Love Actually, which is a fun holiday film, and there are so many great characters in that film, and that is our holiday fundraiser. So I'm really hoping that you guys can join us and think about donating for that event, because that's going to be a fun one for us. But I also want to mention we've got Bill Nighy in the movie Love Actually, and if you happen to be in New York, in our cinema through the holidays, we're going to be showing his new film, 2022 film, Living. And so that also should just be a great film. Gary, you might want to say a word or two about that.
Well, this is, of course, everybody loves Bill Nye because he was in the Harry Potter films, Love Actually, Notes on a Scandal, numerous others, and he plays this film is inspired by an Akira Kurosawa classic called Ikiru, about a bureaucrat who learns that he just has a few months left to live, in the case of Kurosawa's film in Japan, in this case in London. And this is really a beautiful performance by Bill Nye that is being talked up for an Oscar nomination. The Best Actor field is not particularly strong this year, but this is one of the really terrific performances. And he's just a beloved character actor on the Upper West Side and beyond. So I think I strongly encourage you to check this film out on a theater screen with an audience, and you'll see that it really packs an emotional punch.